Ben and I today are going to talk about a program that we put in San Francisco last year to give information to parents about early literacy and engage them more in their children's development and in their children's schooling. So parent engagement, of course, is a big part of local control funding. It's a big part of just our approach to schooling and school choice. You need a lot of parent engagement and parent knowledge for it. But also just kind of direct child learning relies a lot on parents. And what I'm going to be focusing on is mostly direct child learning, but the approach that we take hopefully can be useful for these other kinds of parent engagement as well. So as you probably all know, there's meaningful variation in parenting, and it's systematic with parenting practices that may be less beneficial to kids, concentrated in poor families. There's a whole research on the experiences of kids before they turn 2, and non-poor families are more likely to have very close physical relationships, being caressed, kissed, hugged. Kids are read to more and they're less likely to be spanked. And then there's this very popular fact or finding that poor kids hear about 30 million fewer words than children in professional families by the time they enter kindergarten. So it's big differences, and these things seem to matter. Children who experience responsive and stimulating parental care score higher on assessments of a whole bunch of things: motor, social, emotional, literacy, and numeracy skills. So then we thought, why are some parents more involved in their children's learning than others? What is it that creates these differences? And I highlighted differences between poor and non-poor families, but there's also a lot of variation within those groups, right? There's big variation across parents. And I think you can think about it as either being driven by resources, which are, you just don't have the time, you don't have the money for books, you don't have lots of those kinds of things which would get in the way of the kinds of practices that we're talking about. But there are also personal qualities, things inherent in parents that we want to think about, some of which are driven by resources, but not all. So the first is knowledge. Like, in order to teach reading or to read to your kids, you need to know how to read. You need to have these basic kinds of knowledge of, if you're teaching early math, you need to know what the numbers are and things like that. And we're talking about little kids, and most parents do have that knowledge in the US. There's also abilities. Do you have the ability to read to your child, to get him or her to sit? Do you have those kinds of abilities to engage? And then, what are your attitudes or beliefs? Is that an important thing? That's what we were just fighting about in the back, is like how much parents believe they're supposed to, that it's their responsibility to do these kinds of things, that is an important thing for their child's success. And these three parts are what a lot of parenting programs have focused on, but there's a fourth element to this, which we're calling kind of default behaviors. They're automatic and they're effortless. And they're just things that we kind of do without thinking. So we may be, when we're changing a baby, we may automatically just talk to them, because that's what our parents did for us when we grew up. And it's not that we have to really put any effort into it or draw anything. And it's not that we kind of consciously believe that that's what we should be doing. It's just kind of what we do because that's what we've always done. And these, I think, are going to turn out to be quite important. So there have been a bunch of different kinds of parenting interventions. And the kind of most ubiquitous one is these workshops that schools put on or other organizations put on. They're kind of one-time things. You go in and it's kind of either a pep talk for a certain kind of parenting, or there could be kind of particular skills, or you learn something about child development. There's not a lot of good research on these kinds of workshops, but there's a general consensus, one, that it's hard to get parents to come to them, and two, that they probably don't have very long-lasting effects on anything. There's a second kind that is similar, but it's like more intensive workshops. So there's a famous one on dialogic reading, where you train parents to read to kids in a certain way, where they ask questions. And there have been some studies of those that have found positive effects on parenting practices, but you still have to get parents to show up. Not very many parents show up to that. So if you get a group that can show up, you can have effects on specific things by focusing. So it's not that none of the workshops work. Some of the workshops work, but getting access to parents is really hard, and most of them aren't very good. There's a third kind that tries to get around the problem with having parents show up, is to go someplace that parents are going to just be. And the doctor's office visits, Reach Out and Read is the most famous example of this, where when parents can't come to the doctor for the annual checkup for their kids, they get a book, they get some information on how important it is to read. So they're getting some of the resources. Maybe that helps with those abilities. They're hoping to change attitudes. And there have been a few correlational studies on this that show that it might be promising. But one of the problems is, well, you get almost everybody to show up at these kinds of things. They don't show up very often, unless your annual checkup is by nature an annual checkup. And so this isn't something that's going to hit you very, very intensively. And in that way, it's really unlikely to have strong long-term effects. Then the last kind of parenting interventions to kind of change parenting practices have been these home visits. There's the nurse home visitation program is it happened in the late 60s, and it was very intensive. They're about $10,000 a kid to go in and do this. The nurse goes into the home and really works with the family, and they've found changes in parenting as a result of this program. Not all the implementations of it. They've been done on a couple of different populations, but there is evidence that this is a potentially useful program, but it is very expensive, and because of that, somewhat difficult to scale. So if we look at the limitations of typical interventions, I'm just going to put up what I think they are. One is that they're infrequent, like the doctor's office visits. They're inadequate, like the workshops. There's just like no way that one workshop is really going to change what people do. Most of them are low access, so they don't reach a lot of families. They put a high demand on parents that you have to come in at a certain time when usually either you're taking care of your kid or you're working or something like that, or they're expensive and difficult to scale. And the last part, which turns out to be important for what we're going to do, is that most of them focus on knowledge, skills, and attitudes, but are missing the automatic response kind of stuff. The nursing programs where you're in there and you're helping them day to day, those ones can maybe able to change some of these automatic responses a bit if you're kind of working together at doing something, but generally, almost all the rest of them are just focused on kind of, it's good to read to your kid, here's a book, that kind of thing. Okay, so why might we think automatic responses are important in parenting? And I think there are tons of them, but we've been focusing on 4. What is it that leads to inaction? If I have the knowledge that I know how to read, and I have the time to read, and I know it's important to read, why don't I read to my kid? Or for me, why don't I ask the question while I'm reading? I always think, okay, I'll take this time and read to my child, but the effort that it takes me to ask them questions like, what do you think will happen next? I mean, these things seem like really easy things to do, but those things are somehow get in the way. And so what are the kinds of things that get in the way of that? And I think the first one is, and I'm not sure complexity is exactly the right word, but that parenting is really complex. That for every interaction that we have with our kids, there are about thousands and thousands of different things that we could do with them, right? And we have to make a choice out of those thousands of different things. And making a surprisingly enough choice, we always think a choice is good, but often choice just freezes you. There's a really nice study of selling jam, where people went in and they brought either 6 different kinds of jams or 100 different kinds of jams to a mall, and they were selling them at a table. And what they found is if they had 100 different kinds of jams, a lot more people came up and looked, but if they had 6, more people bought. So they would actually make a decision if you have 6, but you don't make a decision if you have 100, even though there's kind of an appeal of having 100. And parenting is a lot like this. What should I do? What should I do? What should I do? Oops. The second is that you don't have to do this just once. You have to do this over a really long period of time. And it's really easy to lose attention. So you can say, okay, I can make this choice once, but do I have to do it again and again and again and again? And we have to do this over such a long period of time. They're small choices, but it's really easy to lose attention. The third is that there's some delayed gratification to good parenting. You know, if I give my kids some sugar, or we go watch a movie, or so, well, one of my kids doesn't like movies at all, but assuming she liked movies, we'd go watch a movie or something like that. We could, they're immediately happy. It's very, you get some gratification from that. Or even things like, instead of playing with my kid, I'm gonna make a phone call to somebody that I get to talk to and it's fun. You get that kind of immediate gratification for those things, but parenting is delayed gratification, and that keeps people from acting. And then finally is what we talked about, is just these things won't be such an issue if it's what you're just kind of used to. But for families where what we're asking for is a change from the typical, then these things are even more of an issue. Okay. So we were trying to think of an alternative approach, and what our goal was to break down the complexity of parenting into small steps that are easy to achieve, and say, why don't you try this? So that there's no choice in it. It doesn't have to be the only thing you could do, but it's just, you know, there are 10 great things you could do. Let me just give you one of them. And that way you don't have to think very much, and you get away from some of those things. Let's do it over a really long period of time so you don't lose attention, right? So none of these things are very hard, and it's not going to be very intensive, but I'm going to keep doing this so that because parenting is something that you do over a long period of time, and that sustains attention, and the hope is that it might alter the status quo as well. And then we want to provide some continuous encouragement and support for some more immediate gratification. You're helping prepare your child for kindergarten. You know, good job, kind of stuff. And then what's nice is we have the opportunity to leverage technology in order to do this, because otherwise, without technology, it's very hard to do these things. It's very hard to hit people continuously with small things when they have to come into school, or they have to come into the doctor's office. Okay, so texting turns out to be an ideal vehicle for this, for now. And so I think what's important to realize is, I'm going to tell you about a texting program, but I think what it comes down to is thinking about what affects parenting, and then whatever technologies emerge that allow us to do this is really what we want to be focusing on. So texting is great right now because 88% of American adults have cell phones, and that's even higher if you look at the age of parents of young children. 98% of cell phone owners can access texts. Texts have a 95% open rate. So when we're talking about this, people are like, oh, it's just like sending emails. But I mean, email open rates are 36%. My open rate in email is lower than 36%, right? So it's, as David knows. But text you read, and people are reading their texts right now. The other really great part about this is that the families that have been traditionally the most difficult to reach through parenting programs are the ones most likely to use texts, to communicate through texts. Low-income families, Black and Hispanic families, often text with higher frequency than families that would have more typically shown up at the workshops. The other thing is that it's low cost because most adults have unlimited texting plans. In San Francisco preschools, which serve the lower income portion of the lower income third of the San Francisco Unified School District student body, at least 80% of them, or about 80% of them, have unlimited texting. We didn't know that going into this, which I'll show you what we did as a result, but they do. Okay. So texting also has proven efficacy. So in particular, the most texting has been done to remind people to do things. And so that's a little different. I mean, we're reminding people to do them, but we're actually, part of what it is telling them good things to do. But things like glycemic control, things that they have to do regularly, taking medication, not smoking, weight loss, those things, take the stairs, not the elevator. Those kinds of things have proven effective in healthcare. There have been 2 studies in education, none of them in early education, one of them in college. So there's a big drop-off. People say they're going to go to college in the spring, kids graduating from high school, but then they don't actually enroll in the following fall. And there's been a texting program that has aimed at them to get them to actually follow through and enroll in the fall, and it's shown effects there. And then there's one other one for high school students, that if the child doesn't turn in the homework, the parents, this researcher texted the parents to tell them that their child hadn't turned in the homework, and that turned out to make the students very mad at the researcher, but to increase their grade point average. Yes, and he signed his name, which was always, I guess it was a way to not make the kids mad at the teacher. Okay, so this is what we're calling Ready4K. What we used text to do was to exploit everyday learning opportunities, to demonstrate to parents that positive practices can be fun and easy. And our goal was to have the parenting practices become automatic over time, which we can't quite tell you if they did or not, but that's our goal, and we're hoping to measure that at some point. Okay, so this is how we set them up. On Monday, we sent parents a fact text to generate buy-in. I'm thinking about the ones we did last week, and it's something like knowing shorter, I guess I should do a literacy. Beginning word sounds, understanding beginning word sounds is an important part of learning to read. You know, point out beginning word sounds or something like that. It's basically the idea that you generate buy-in because you point to something that is something that you want the parents to do. Maybe something like having conversations with your child helps them develop comprehension, or I'm not quite sure. I'll give you a whole bunch of examples because I'm not thinking of them well right now. The second thing we do is on Wednesday we send a tip. Here's a very simple thing that you can do. Why am I only thinking of math? We're doing math this year. What I'm telling you about is last year where we're doing literacy. So what's a very simple thing you can do? One of the simple things, and I'll give you some more examples of them, but it would be like point out that bear and barn both begin with the sound B. And or tomato, ask your child what sound does tomato and taco begin with? Okay, so we'd say one very short thing for them to do that would be related to the fact on Monday. And then on Friday we say, by doing this, by telling your child the beginning sounds of words, you're helping to prepare them for kindergarten. And then we gave them another thing to do. So basically each week you get 2 things that would take a very short amount of time, but that you could do. And so, we covered a wide range of literacy skills. So alphabet knowledge, letter sounds, beginning sound awareness, rhyme awareness, name writing, concepts of print, a whole bunch of things. And some weeks were skills focused. So here's the beginning word sound that I should have remembered. So it was fact. You can help your child learn to read by saying the beginning sound of words. Read and run start with The tip. Say 2 words to your child that start with the same sound. Ask your child, can you hear the h sound in happy and healthy? Growth. Keep saying beginning word sounds. You're preparing your child for K. Now ask your child what sound taco and tomato start with. Okay, so this is a very skills-oriented one, but you get the kind of basic structure. Some of them emphasize conversations. Fact, having conversations with your child can enhance his or her vocabulary skills and confidence. Talk to your child often and ask questions. Tip, during a meal, ask your child, what is your favorite food? Why? Now tell your child what your favorite food is and why. So that's, having a specific question to ask just makes that interaction easier. And that's what sometimes I sit in a car and I'm like, what can I ask my 15-year-old? And this is just a way of getting over that. Growth, keep having conversations. You're preparing your child for K. Now ask, what was the most fun thing at school today? Why was it fun? Okay. Some of the weeks combine and revisit skills, so we kind of use a spiral curriculum. And this is one that's based on bath time. We try to pull it towards regular activities. So bath time is great for teaching your child important skills for K. Start by asking your child, what are the things we need for bath time? Why? Tip, when you're bathing your child, point out the letters on the shampoo bottles. Ask your child to name them and tell you the sounds that they make. Growth, by teaching at bath time, you're preparing your child for K. Next time, ask questions about body parts. What are your elbows? What do they do? Okay, whoops. Some emphasized, some combined. Okay, so what did we do with these? Well, we worked with San Francisco. Ben and I have had a long relationship with the early education department in San Francisco. We helped them put in a formative assessment system. Ben's done a whole bunch on data reports and analysis tools, creating kindergarten readiness measures, and doing some professional development. And this came from that relationship. They were interested. They basically said, we don't think that our workshops are doing all that we want to do to engage parents. Do you have some other ideas for what we could do? And that's where this came from. As I was saying, the early education department serves about 1/3 of San Francisco's preschool market. They operate 21 standalone sites and 13 sites that are co-located in elementary schools. So in the 2013-14 school year, we distributed enrollment forms to the early ed enrollment clerks, and we paid families, paid the clerks $10 per family to enroll the families. We also gave the families $10 gift cards for enrolling, and we gave them a choice of either $10 per month or that we would send them, or what we hoped they would take up was $12 a month on Amazon so we could just email it to them. Unfortunately, most people preferred the $10 per month. Now, we did this because we worried that they didn't have unlimited text, and we didn't want this to be costly. If you don't have unlimited text, I think we've estimated now that it's really not very costly anyway to receive as much as we did, and so we've pulled this. So this year, we're redoing this in San Francisco with the preschool and with the kindergarten, and we're not doing the $10 per month for that. And that hasn't seemed to affect our enrollment. Okay, so there were 874 eligible families. We didn't get into all of the centers because we were so reliant on the clerks. We weren't there. We missed a few of the preschools, particularly the ones in elementary school, because they have a different enrollment system, but we still ended up with 519 families. Unfortunately, when you enroll in the preschool, not all the kids actually end up showing up for preschool. And 60 left San Francisco before or during the school year that don't seem to have anything to do with this, because most of them we hadn't even texted anybody before they didn't show up. But only 9 opted out of the study during the year. So it was only an opt-out rate of 2% for either our treatment or control groups. The sample, it's San Francisco, so it's approximately 34% Hispanic kids, 29% Chinese, 15% Black, and we gave them the options of texting in Spanish, English, or Chinese. We may not have done the greatest job in Chinese, to be honest. We're trying to do a better job this year for a couple of reasons, which I can talk about at the end if you're interested. 78% of parents have less than a bachelor's degree. Nearly 90% received financial assistance. But even with that, 80% had unlimited texting, which we didn't know until they enrolled. So what we did was a randomized control trial. We randomly selected half of the parents within each site to get our texts and half of them to get what we were hoping were placebo texts. And I'm just going to give you 2 examples. They're not terrible texts, and it turns out the parents liked getting these other texts too. They just don't have anything about the child-parent interaction. So it was things like, students new to San Francisco are required to have a TB skin test. Children entering K need these other kinds of vaccines. Or SFUSD's strategic plan guides the district's work. The 2013-15 plan has 6 strategies for success. Learn more at sfusd.edu. So we didn't do them very often, about once every 2 weeks. But we did do some texts. So to look at the effect of it, we had 4 sets of outcomes. And the first is just the parents' reports of whether they open the text, whether they like the text, whether they use the text, those kinds of things. The second would be parents' self-report of their home literacy practices. And we like this because that's really what we're aiming to do, is to change the practices. And not all of the texts were around skill development in the kids or around specific things. So we wanted to ask the parents about this. But there is the worry here that they're just they will receive these texts so they know we want them to say that they did it, and so they say that they did it. So it's not the perfect outcome. We would have liked to observe all of this, but at least it means they've internalized what's in the texts if we find something. Then our third set of outcomes, I love, they're my favorite. We went to the teachers and we gave surveys to the teachers, and because we randomly assigned parents within sites, all the teachers had both treatment and control parents. And for each parent, but the teacher didn't know which were getting the placebos and which were getting Ready4K. So we asked them questions about whether the parents came in and talked to them about a bunch of different things. And so we could look at that kind of parent engagement in school. And then the University of San Francisco goes into preschools in San Francisco twice a year and does a literacy assessment. PALS, the Phonological Awareness Literacy Screening, and so we use that as measures of child outcome. And so I'm just going to tell you the results of what we found. Okay, so here's the parent survey that gets at when you received Ready4K texts, did you read them? Did you use the information? Was it helpful? Would you recommend it? Those kinds of things. And this, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Yes, they liked it. Okay, so that's one of the nice things. And we see that because they didn't pull out. But generally, all our experience with this, which I think has been really nice for us, is that parents want this. Parents want this where I work. So we talk about this and they say, can I receive this? Because we all feel like we could benefit by getting some information in the moment to actually do something. So that was good. And I was saying the placebo people liked it too. So they're not over-texted at this point. At some point they might get over-texted, but they even like the other information, but not nearly as much as they like the kind of detailed literacy. So the second thing we did, so this would be an example, how many times did you do each of the following activities with your child? Told your child a story, asked your child questions about his or her day, gave your child a book to try to look at, showed or helped your child write her name, those kinds of things. And what we found is that the parents who received the texts said that they engaged more frequently in home literacy activities with their children. I guess I can just look at it here. So in particular, they said they did storytelling more, beginning word sounds, rhyming, nursery rhymes, looking at pictures in books, conventions of print, and playing games or working on puzzles. They said they did all of that more, and the effects are really quite big. Now, of course, some of it could be because they think we want this, but at least they believe they're doing this more. It's about a quarter to a third of a standard deviation, which is, in text speak, but it's a big effect, 17 to 27 percentile points, so that if you were, in the middle, it moves you to the 75th percentile. It's a pretty big effect on reported parenting. Then this is what the teachers did. How often do parents of student 1, and we just plugged in the student name, ask about the following topics: their child's interests, their child's friends, how their child gets along with others, and a few other things, and never, sometimes, regularly, often. So, you know, this is what we use to see if they were engaging more with the teachers. And what we found is that parents in the treatment group asked the teachers more questions about their children, particularly how the child gets along with others, what the child is doing in school, and what they can do at home to help their child learn to read. And these effects are moderately big too, kind of 10 to 15 percentile points. So we were kind of thrilled with these results. And then the last thing is PALS. So it's PALS Pre-K is a scientifically based phonological awareness, I totally can't read it on here, awareness and literacy screening that measures preschoolers developing knowledge of important literacy fundamentals and offers guidance to teachers for tailoring instruction to children's specific needs. This was the assessment that we had helped San Francisco put in before, but what's nice is there's an outside group that comes in and does it so that it's more consistent across classrooms, and it's not as time-consuming for teachers. And what we found is that the treatment group, amazingly enough, scored higher on PALS too, which is amazing. Now, just to, I have one caveat on this, is there is a group that of the, you have to perform at least to one level on alphabet knowledge to go and get the other kinds of things. And these are preschoolers, so sometimes you come in and they're just not going to concentrate. And so we don't know in that lower range if they weren't concentrating or if we didn't hit that lower range. We've done a little bit of tests. That lower range seems a little less predictive. I think it's just kind of a mess. When Ben went in for some of these, and you know, really kids are climbing on people while they're doing it. So anyway, it didn't, our effects come from all except for those kids, but we found gains in uppercase alphabet knowledge, lowercase alphabet knowledge, letter sounds, and the sum scores. And these range from 16 to 27 percentile points. And the largest effects are roughly equivalent to 2 to 3 months of learning. So they're really kind of shockingly big effects, not on the whole sample, but on the majority of the sample. So basically this led us, it's a small pilot, but we feel like, it's a really promising approach. It can engage parents, it can improve student learning as a result, and parents want this. There's something about it that's very appealing. It made us feel like behavioral barriers are super important to consider when you're considering parenting practices. Most of the parents really want to do this. It's just that it's hard to actually get ourselves to do this. It's just a pilot, but we have a bunch of current extensions, and it seems to us that there's high demand for it. So this year, in San Francisco, we've got, in pre-K, instead of doing literacy versus the placebo, we're doing literacy versus math, just so everybody could get it, but we try to understand how parents engage in math, and since schools generally have focused so much on literacy, it'll be interesting to see if we find something for math as well. In developing the texts, we find that math is really very fun to do as a parent. And the other is that we worry a little bit about the split because so much of math at that age is vocabulary. Longer, shorter, all of those kinds of things. So we're doing pre-K math. We're moving with our group into kindergarten, and then we added on other kindergarteners in literacy. And we're doing some personalization. So based on their fall PALS scores, we will give them slightly different texts. We have additional pilots and, I guess it didn't save. Additional pilots and extensions. So we've got some things going on, and Ben was going to be better at talking about these than I am. But in California, Massachusetts, North Carolina, Texas, and nationally with places like Head Start, and now hopefully with the school improvement grant schools nationally. And we're looking at different, the thing we're doing this year is looking at some other kinds of things that we want to test. And then as we move it out to a big scale starting next fall, we're still kind of pondering what we're going to look at. It's a work in progress. There are many variations that we can do. And I think what's important is because I think texts are this great use right now, but as I was saying, it's a great vehicle right now, but it may not always be a great vehicle. And so what we should do is learn as much as we can about parenting and how to engage parents so that we know what future technologies are really most likely to be useful, and we know how to use those technologies. And in particular, there are 3 areas that we're interested in, is kind of what are these barriers to parenting? I named a few: complexity, attention, immediate gratification, but those might not be the only ones. What kind of child outcomes should parents really be focusing on? The kinds of child outcomes that schools focus on and parents focus on may not be the same that we want to be thinking about. And also, what are kind of the most effective parenting approaches? I think I have some examples. So we talked about complexity, attention, and gratification. On their child outcomes, there's literacy, there's math, there's all these social, emotional. There are clearly other ones on there, but we want to kind of think about what are the right ones to be targeting. And then on parents, there's kind of skill focus, there's closeness and support, there's comprehension or vocabulary, telling stories and hearing words and things like that. And so I think what we want to do out of something like, out of this program is to really learn a little more about these things. So just to wrap it up, I think the implications is that texting is an attractive alternative to existing parenting programs. It's not everything, right? These are 140 characters 3 times a week. And so if you then want to go into depth, you have to use something besides texts. But it gets you a long way towards the kind of road that you need to then use some of the more kind of informative, rich information. It's ideal for breaking down small tasks, it's widely used, it's low cost, and it's incredibly scalable. The other thing we just wanted to leave you with is that developing a high-quality texting program that's content isn't really as easy as it looks. It takes time and care, and we worry that it's so easy that we'll just say, okay, let's do a text, and I'm just going to either say it in a way that doesn't reach you, or what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make it really complex. So I'm going to use text to link you to something that's just this really hard thing to get through, and then you lose a lot of what we have in here, which is what we're doing is making this easy. And so I don't think the results are a call for let's just text tons. It's a call for let's really try to understand what the barriers are to parenting so we can really help kids develop and particularly close the gaps that we see that are so evident. So that is the presentation, and then we're happy to talk to you about the program or answer any questions that you have.